We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, and we basically are finished with the halachot of people who are going to get aliyah on Shabbatot and Yamim Tovim, Siman Kuf Lamed Vav. We are starting Siman Kuf Lamed Zayin, of how many psukim you have to read, but we left off just a little bit of detail of the Machloket HaPoskim about a scenario in which you had to give an aliyah to a Mechal Shabbat befaresya. We mentioned that a person that halachically is considered a public desecrator of Shabbat, which by itself is not so simple. There are two schools of thought, whether or not regular people who do not keep Shabbat nowadays are considered tinokot shenishbu, people who did not get better education, and had they gotten better education, they would not be mechalel Shabbat like that. It's not considered an act of rebellion, or maybe not. But nevertheless, if you have to give an aliyah to a mechalel Shabbat befaresya, the Ben Ish Chai writes in Rav Pe'alim, in his tshuvot, that you should give right after him to Adam Kasher. You add an aliyah, a musif, and you go back and you read the psukim that you read for that person, for the Mechalel Shabbat, again. So in other words, the Ben Ish Chai is machmir, that not only he doesn't count as an aliyah, the psukim you read also does not count. You have to go back. How about Yah says, well, you bring him another person, you give an aliyah to another person, but you don't have to necessarily repeat. It's the minyan ha'olim that matters. Not necessarily is going to be a problem if you read some of the psukim with. And the Letzion says, well, l'chatchila you want to give to another person al aliyah, but b'di'evet you could even count the Baal Koreh himself as one that is reading, even though that he doesn't say the bracha, but he is the one that's reading. So therefore, you could count that as well. So really, this is based on the case. Of course, we mentioned, for instance, the Eliyahu Rabbah writes that a person that drives on Shabbat, well, he didn't have a car in his time, but he's Mechal Shabbat, but in front of the rabbi of the community, he would not do it. He would not do it in front of the rabbi. He would do Hilul Shabbat in front of others, but he has a little bit left of busha, of a proper bashfulness and shame. So that by itself saves him from being Mechal Shabbat befaresya. Again, that's debatable among the poskim, but nevertheless, we try to add and create another aliyah for a Shomer Shabbat as a mosif. But if not, you have Chacham Ben Sion Rabbi Shaul to rely on as well. Now, also the Mishnah Berura, one other thing that we left off is, the Mishnah Berura says nowadays the minhag is you give the mashlim with Kaddish to the most important person. So that becomes all of a sudden the most important aliyah, even though that Shulchan Aruch and the minhag Ashkenaz has been that Shlishi is really the most important, because the first one after Kohen and Levi. It's the hierarchy coming down from Kohen to Levi and to the most important person afterwards. But again, these things are subject to minhagim as well, and hence, according to what the Mishnah Berura writes in Sif Katan Hey that we read, nowadays for the Ashkenazim it becomes one of the more important ones. And again, within the communities of the Sfaradim, there are those who value it that way as well. But at the same time, the Ben Ish Chai, Kaf HaChaim, all the Poskei Mekubalim, the Chesed Alafim, all those who follow the writings of Ari HaKadosh and Zohar HaKadosh, based on Arizal over here, write that the Aliyah of Shishi is the holiest one, based on what it represents, because it's comparable to the Shesh Tzavot, whatever. It corresponds with Yesod, and that's the most fundamental of the Aliyot. Hence, it's the most important of all of the Aliyot. And again, the second in command would be, according to Arizal, Shlishi, which would be important, and after those two, it would follow really the order that would be the Kohen and the Levi, Revi'i, Chamishi, and Mashlim. So it comes out that Mashlim, according to the Kabbalah, is really less important. But again, many people, because of the Minhag Ashkenaz, or because he has Kaddish and they want to be Zochet to say the Kaddish because they have a yortzeit or they're Betoch Hashanah and so on and so forth, then they appreciate that more than other aliyot. and they're willing to even pay for it, kesef to'afot. So that is, again, depending on the minhagim. Now, when you have Mosif, do you have to read new psukim, or can you just repeat the psukim that you read? In other words, some communities have a minhag that they read Shishi, for instance, and before giving Mashlim, they go back to the 3 psukim, and you could be having 5 Mosifs, and still you're going back to the same aliyah. Again, like you have this in, at the end when you say, Ula Asher Amar, Mevorechet Hashem Arzo, you go back, give aliyah to the minhag is everybody gets aliyah on that day, and you just repeat that. So that's a minhag of Klal Yisrael in a major way, but nevertheless, the Or Letzion writes that when you have the first 7 people who get an aliyah, even if one of them after Shishi is a Mosif, those are considered the 7 Olim, and afterwards is Mosif, right? Afterwards is Mosif, and therefore the Chashivut of Shevi'i is not because is Mashlim, he finishes the parasha, but it's a matter of counts. It's a game of numbers, so to speak. It's the 7th person that gets an aliyah, and therefore it's not necessarily the last person that gets an aliyah, but the 7th person that gets an aliyah. So that's an important yediyah to have. And when you add to the Shiva Olim, and for some of them you're going back to read the psukim that you already have read in the previous aliyot, Kaf HaChaim says that the 6th person, the Shishi, from all the aliyot, that the people who are going up to the Torah, that you're reading psukim, the new psukim for them, that is the person that's considered the 6th aliyah, the Shishi, which is the most important Keneged Yesod, which is really aligned with what we said in the name of the Or Letzion. Now, what do you do in Yom Kippurim? Yom Kippurim, you don't have 7 aliyot. You only have 6 aliyot. So Kaf HaChaim says, still, the 6th one is the most important, because, again, it's a game of numbers. 6th one is Yesod, even in Yom Kippurim. And if you have a Yom Tov, regular Yom Tov, which only has 5 aliyot to offer, then the Ben Ish Chai and Kaf HaChaim, they write that the 5th aliyah is, which is the Mashlim, is the most important one. And Rosh Chodesh would be, of course, according to Kaf HaChaim, and the Ben Ish Chai would be Aliyat Revi'i. So if a person wants to know the hierarchy, that would be the hierarchy of Rosh Chodesh, regular Yom Tov, Yom Kippurim, and Shabbat. Fine. So let's start now the next Siman Kuf Lamed Zayin. Kama psukim srichim likro lechol echad. How many psukim do you have to read minimum for every person that gets up to the Torah? Says the Shulchan Aruch, and again this is straight from the Gemara in Masechet Megillah Daf Chaf Aleph. Biyom shkorin shlosha en korin pachot ma'asara psukim. When you have 3 aliyot only, Shabbat afternoon, Monday to Thursdays, you have to at least read 10 psukim from the Torah. You can't say, well, every person gets 3, so 9 psukim would suffice. The minimum of the read of the Torah in the Tzibur is 10 psukim. And Vaidaber ole min haminyan. Even Vaidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, even though that is kind of like a preface to what the Torah is going to say, still is considered, of course, one pasuk as well. Ve'isalik inyana be'basir ma'asara psukim kikum parashat Amalek. What do you do in parashat Amalek? Parashat Amalek is only 9 psukim, right? And it's the end of the topic. Well, you're going to start another pasuk from the next unrelated topic, says the Shulchan Aruch. In that case, that only she'en ba ela tish'a psukim, that only has 9 psukim, shapir dami, it's fine. Because it's a complete inyan that ends by 9 psukim. We don't require you to go and start another pasuk from an unrelated parasha and just leave it hanging after one pasuk. We don't require you to do that. We suffice with 9 psukim in that scenario. Says the Mishnah Berura. The reason that we don't do it is, as we mentioned in Chaf Aleph Amud Bet in Masechet Megillah, the Gemara explains then the reason for this is a takana keneged the Asara Dibrot, the 10 commandments, the reading of the Torah every single time that we bring it out is a reenactment of Har Sinai. Therefore, you need to have 3 people there. Right, one of them representing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who gave the Dibrot, gave the Torah. One of them representing the Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the intermediary, if you want to call it that, and the other one is Klal Yisrael. That's why you need 3 people, not just because one is giving signs. Even if he doesn't need signs, you still want to have 3 people by the Amud. And one of the simulations to that imagery is the fact that we read at least 10 psukim corresponding to the 10 dibrot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke by Har Sinai, and also the giving of the Torah and the creation of the world are very much interlocked and interconnected, because the pasuk says, "Im lo briti yomam v'layla chukot shamayim v'aretz lo samti." If it wasn't because of my Torah, the world would go back to nothingness and being desolate. So the creation also is very much connected with that, which, of course, Chazal tell us, Mishpat Asara Ma'amarot Nivra Olam. The world was created with 10 ma'amars, right? If you say Vayomer Elokim, Hi Or, Vahi Or, right? Vayomer Elokim, Irakia Dochamayim. There are 10 of those. Well, 9 plus 1, Bereshit Nami Ma'amarhu, and therefore, when we bring out the Torah, realizing that this is the DNA of the creation, this is why the world stands and does not go desolate. We do 10 psukim in correspondence with those 10 ma'amarot that the world was created through them as well. And the Sefer Shtilei Zetim writes that these reasons are based on Drush. It's not the real, even though the Gemara brings it, the Gemara also has Drushim. But the real reason says, the Shtilei Zetim is because Chazal gave these shiurim that the reading of the Torah should not be less than 10 psukim, and if it is, it's not kriya chashuva. It's not an important read. It's not an important read. Really, that's why if you have 9, but it's an important read because it's a whole parasha, it's Parashat Amalek. The whole parasha is 9 psukim, and it finishes, the whole inyan, the whole parasha finishes. That's a davar chashuv. It's a whole inyan in the Torah, so therefore it suffices even though that's less than 10. That's how the Shtilei Zetim writes. But nevertheless, it's beautiful. The imagery that we have by Har Sinai and by the creation of the world are powerful, beautiful imageries. Nevertheless, so says the Mishnah Berura, even though that we don't learn any chidush from Vaydaber Hashem and Moshe Lemor, which is a preface to the parasha upcoming, still is considered one of the 10 psukim, because again, it's not a matter of how much you learn from, it's a matter of, this is one of the psukim, it's a game of numbers. Again, it's important to cover 10 psukim, and it definitely does count as one of the psukim. Now, Parashat Amalek, that we mentioned, is only 9 psukim. That's the Parashat Amalek that we read on Purim. We're not talking about Parashat Zachor over here. We're talking about the Parashat Amalek that's read on Purim itself. Velo ratzu Chazal, and Chachamim did not want to add more psukim to it from before or from after. לרמז מפני שעמלק גרם להיות השם וכיסא חסר, כי עליו כסקה, כך יהיו פרשיותיו חסרים. A very interesting analogy that, and again, Chazal tell us that Amalek is what they stand for is the destruction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kavod in this world. Usually, actually, Parashat Terumah is Parashat Zachor. So it's very much appropriate. We spoke about the building of the Mishkan, which brings about dissolving all of the doubts that there is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because what was Amalek's power? Yesh Hashem bekirbenu im ayin. When we had safek, Amalek is gimatria safek, right? Doubts. Is there HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Is there HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So Mishkan, when you build Mishkan and you see the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a daily basis in a clear manifestation of the glory of Hashem, a showcase of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hashgacha, and that of course goes against the Amalek, but Amalek is the one that makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, so to speak, chaser in this world. That's why it says ki kiyad al kes ka. Instead of saying kiseh, it says kes. It's chaser. It's like chipped from it. And instead of saying yud kevavke, it says ka. So Chazal say, en Hashem shalem, ven kiseh shalem. Hashem's name is not complete. Hashem's chariot is not complete until Amalek is obliterated and taken away. And therefore, we also, the psukim of Amalek also is chaser, is chipped, is 9 instead of being 10. So that's also imagery that we are given by Chazal. But even though that later on, we learn in Shulchan Aruch that sometimes, this is in Hilchot Chanukah, Siman Tafresh Tzadi Gimel, that in psukim of Chanukah, when we're missing one, we just repeat the same pasuk to just fill the content of the psukim, the number of the psukim, and that's something we do on Chanukah on a daily basis, and you could have done that here as well by Parashat Amalek. You don't have to necessarily read an extra pasuk, but we don't do it here. And the Pri Chadash, Rabbi Chizkiah di Silva, one of the Talmidim of, again, there's 2 generations after Maran of Shulchan Aruch. He came from Italy at the age 20. He unfortunately did not live a very long life, but he lived a tremendously productive life. He was one of the Gdolei HaOlam. There are those who write that whenever you don't have a clear psak from Maran Shulchan Aruch, we accepted, as the Sephardim accepted upon ourselves the psak of Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash is a tremendous luminary of Torah. So Pri Chadash explains over here that the reason is not mikar adin, it's a minhag. It's just a minhag, and therefore Shulchan Aruch is writing just the ikar adin, that you could have 9 psukim, and if he completes the inyan, and now this really goes very well with what we just mentioned, that because the Amalek created chisaron in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kavod, we leave the parasha chaser. We don't want to complete the parasha by reading more psukim and repeating them. He has a reason behind it in that way. Also, so therefore we leave it as 9 psukim, and we complete the read by less than 10. That's an exception to the regular rule that we have. Now let's do one more seif over here. En korin im kol echad pachot misherusha psukim. Now we said that you can't read less than 10 psukim subtotal, but can I do 5 psukim for one and 2 psukim for one? Can I do that? No. The minimum of every oleh la Torah has to be 3 psukim. Shnayim korin shlosha ve'echad koreh arba'a. So if you're doing minimum of 10, 2 of them will get 3, 1 of them will get 4. That's the inevitable division that you're going to have when you have 3, because they cannot get less than 3 psukim. So it will leave you with exactly this divide of 3, 3, and 4. Well, again, that would be the minimum of the psukim that you read will be 12 in that case, not 10, because you have the rule of not less than 10, but you also have the rule of not less than 3 for each one. So you'll end up with a minimum of 12 psukim in that case. And same would be for Shabbat, right? Even though that there was a minhag in the time of the Gemara that they finished the Chumash every 3 years, and you could have a diminished Kriyat Torah, but you can't be less than, again, 21. And that's, by the way, the reason that Haftarah has to be minimum 21 psukim. Why? Because Haftarah was instituted instead of Kriyat Torah when there was a gezerah not to learn Torah in public. So they were not allowed to do Kriyat Torah on Shabbat morning. Not to forget the inyan of Kriyat Torah, they instituted that Navi should be read publicly. And then when the times became better afterwards, they just didn't take it away. But because it was formatted after Kriyat Torah, and you have 7 olim times 3 psukim minimum each, that equals 21, and therefore by Haftarah the minimum of the read would be 21, again, aside from exceptions that apply to the Kriyat Torah as well, if the inyan finishes and so on and so forth. So, says the Shulchan Aruch, the one that's going to get the arba'ah is the better aliyah, is hareze meshubach. So says the Mishna Berura, what does that mean? Klomar, the mishkara yoter meshubach yoter, the one that gets more psukim in the Torah read for him, gevaldik, that the better that is. So says the Mishna Berura, if the first one gets 4, that's good. And in Menorah we find that the emtzai meshubach, the middle one is the middle kaneh, the middle branch of Menorah was more important. So if the Levi gets it, also is good. And if the last one gets the 4, we could say, well, you go up in kedusha, you don't come down. So you could really choose to give 4 to each one of the olim. Doesn't make a difference. In other words, there's no hierarchy to say, well, let's give the first one the 4. The way you have to divide it, 3, 3, and 4, it should be the first one, or the second, or you could do any of them, because each one, the first, the middle, and the last, each one of them have a plus that the other ones don't, so therefore you could choose to give it the 4, which is the better one, to any of them that you want, and that would be fine as well, which really concludes Seif Bet. Bezrat Hashem will continue this in the days to come.